everyone, and welcome to your virtual AC Day 1 wine education session. We are thrilled you are here, and we are so excited to kick off the fall semester with you. We have a ton of exciting free events for you today, and all the details can be found on the Algonquin College orientation website. We'll add the link to the chat. My name is Leanne, and I am the events programmer for Algonquin College. Before we get started, we're going to share a couple of housekeeping items. We kindly ask you, please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. However, we encourage you to keep your camera on for some face-to-face time. Along the bottom of the screen, you will find a chat button. Feel free to use this feature to introduce yourself and let us know what program you're in. If you have any questions for the event facilitators, you can also type them here. So to kick off the wine education session, we're going to give away 2 gift cards to Connections, the campus store. All you have to do is open up the chat, and in a couple of seconds, we're going to give everyone a fun question to answer. We would like you all to answer the question by typing in the chat, but please wait to press send until we say so, because we're all going to send our answers at the same time. So the question is, if you could visit any wine region, which would it be? So again, please wait to press send until everyone has had a chance to type their answer. The question again is, if you could visit any wine region, which would it be? You have everyone a couple more seconds to type their answer. And okay, I'm going to count down from 3, and we're all going to send our answers at the same time. So 3, 2, 1, send. Oh, so many fun ones. Italy, France, Georgia.
Ooh, Georgia. Oh.
Tuscany. What a great variety. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your answer. Our event team member, Michelle Heavey, is now going to choose 2 students at random.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining. Okay, so I just picked 2 students to win the 2 $50 gift cards to Connections, the campus bookstore. And I'll be messaging both of these students privately in the chat to coordinate, get your emails, and then give you the code for the gift card. It can be used online. So the winners are Ben Allingham, and then the second winner is Teresa Barros de Silva. So congratulations to both of you, Ben and Teresa. So we do have more giveaways going on the Algonquin College Student Support Services social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So I definitely recommend you checking those out. We'll add the links to the chat. Congratulations, guys.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate you taking the time to join this and to do that giveaway. We would now like to welcome Leah Chrisholm, an Algonquin College sommelier and bartending alumna, who will be leading us through a fun and friendly tour through the world of wine. Leah, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I am so glad you're all here and that you're all interested in wine, because quite frankly, that's how I started. So, like was just said, I did the Algonquin sommelier and bartending programs both in the last 2 years, and I loved them, and that's why I'm here. I'm giving back to my college. I really, really loved it. As far as my experience goes, work experience that is, I worked at a brew your own wine place for several years. I worked at a vineyard actually all of last summer, which was fantastic, and I also worked at the LCBO. So I've had a nice wide range of experience, and hopefully that will be able to help you get a bit more of an appreciation for wine. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So I suppose the easiest place to start would be, what is wine? So wine is grape juice that has been fermented, which means it's been turned into alcohol. And in order to do that, you need to take your juice, which has sugar in it. You have to take yeast, which is a microorganism of sorts, and you need oxygen. And all of those together makes alcohol. It's not rocket science. It's delicious is what it is. But that is what you need to make wine. You need sugar, you need yeast, you need oxygen, and from that comes alcohol and actually carbon dioxide, but we're not going to go into the science. A lot of factors are taken into account when you're making a wine. things that can affect the heaviness of the wine, things that can affect the tastes of the wine or the sugar content. That's referred to in wine speak as terroir. So it comes from the French terroir, literally the ground. But in winemaking, what it means is the whole atmosphere. So the climate, the soil, the type of grape, everything together is what sort of everything melds and all comes together to make a delicious wine. And that's why we have so many different varieties and flavors, because it all depends on the grape. It all depends on the region. It all depends on the weather. So that's why wine has become rather an art. So there is science, but there's also art. So hopefully that was clear enough for our first little taste of, well, not taste, we'll taste later. First little introduction to wine. Oh, and by the way, I'm actually going to have a little question session, like a mini one at the end of each section. So if you do have any questions, type them in the chat and the moderators will get them to me. Okay, so you probably know there are many different kinds of wine. The most popular, and three of which that we're going to be trying, red wine, which is made from the skins. That's the how it gets the red color, is actually from the grape skins. So when the fermentation is done, when you're making the wine, the juice sits on the red skins of the grape and you get red wine. There is white wine, and that's where you take just the juice. Usually there's a little bit of skin contact, but not a whole lot. So you get that sort of clearish, uncolored wine. You also have rosé, which I don't have with me here today, but a rosé is pink, pretty obvious. And that can be made either from leaving the skins in the grape juice for just a little bit of time, like just enough to give it a bit of a rosy glow, or it can be made by mixing a white and a red. So depending on who you talk to, some people say that one method is, you know, better than another, but like many things in wine, personal taste trumps everything. Let's see now. There's another couple of types of wine that you may be a little less familiar with, and we're actually going to be tasting two of them today. One is a dessert wine. So that's a wine that has been sweetened extra. So it's not just the sugar from the juice, from the grape juice itself, it's also had sweetener added to it. There's also fortified wine. So that's wine that extra alcohol has been added to make it sort of extra strong. And that would be things like port or sherry or Madeira, which you may have heard of. And of course, sparkling wine. So everyone knows champagne. Champagne is a type of sparkling wine that comes from a very specific region in France called Champagne. But really the type of wine is called sparkling because all champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is a champagne. So keep that in mind. And as far as the other sort of ways that you can tell different types of wine, we have the different sweetness levels. So your average wine will most likely be dry, which means it has no sweetener added to it. And we'll go over the different kind of tastes when we actually do the tasting. But if you hear a wine that is dry, that means there's no sweetener in it. There's off dry, which literally just means a little off from dry. So it's just a teensy little bit sweetened. There's medium sweet, which is sort of midway sweet. And then there's sweet, also called luscious. If you're at the LCBO and you want a really sweet dessert wine, you'll see it described as luscious or lusciously sweet. Doesn't that just make you want to drink it? Just luscious. So yes, a luscious wine is a very, very, very sweet wine. So those are the basics of sort of what kind of wines you're going to encounter. You've got your reds, you've got your whites, your rosés, you've got your sparklings, your dessert wines, and they have different levels of sweetness. And that's normally what you would sort of first be looking at. Sorry, I see the chat. I'm just about to get to the end here, and then I'll answer your questions. Yes, so that's about it. So if you have any questions about the stuff that I just went over, put it in the chat and I'll take a quick look here.
Awesome, Leah. So one of the questions in the chat is some of the students have went ahead and bought in the wines that you are sharing tonight, so they're going to drink along with you.
Fantastic.
A student is wondering, they couldn't find the Riesling on the list, so they bought an Inniskillen.
Inniskillen? Yeah, that's it depends on if it's the dessert wine, then that I would say it's definitely comparable.
Perfect, thank you. And there's a very general question in the chat about pairing food with wine. So I was thinking, can you share one food item to pair with each of the wines that you've mentioned?
We're actually going to be going over that a bit later.
Okay, perfect.
So when we try these wines, I'm actually going to also do a bit about food and wine pairing. So I'm definitely going to give you a great idea about what to pair with these, and also some general guidelines about sort of wines to pair with food. That'll be a lot more useful.
Great. And someone is wondering, where does ice wine fit in these categories?
Ice wine is a dessert wine. So like the Riesling that we have today, it would be, the one that we have is called a late harvest wine. So it's kind of in between a regularly sweet wine and an ice wine. The ice wine is like the sweetest of the sweet. And it's, I don't know if I should go through the whole how ice wine is made. It's basically, it's when grapes are frozen and then they're crushed, the ice crystals kind of leach the water away from the sugar. So the juice that comes out is less juice, like less water, and more sugar. So you end up with almost a syrupy juice. And that's how ice wine is made. It's just extra, extra, extra sweet because the grapes were frozen. Late harvest is not done with frozen grapes. It's just done with more ripe grapes than your average wine. So ice wine is definitely a dessert wine. It's sweeter than our Riesling, but definitely in the same category.
Great, thank you so much. That's all the questions we have for now. So we'll keep rolling and we'll save the next questions for the next break in the session.
Perfect. All right. So next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about wine regions. So wine is made more or less all over the world, but you're most often going to find it in a sweet spot. Now, my teacher's are going to kill me because I can't remember what the actual latitude, I believe it's 30 degrees of latitude above the equator and below the equator. I believe that's the magic number where the bulk of the best wine regions are grown in that sort of band around the earth. And only because that's where the climates are the most favorable to grow grapes for wine. So most of the wine regions we'll talk about will be in that sort of band around the earth. Not too hot, not too cold. Now, obviously, here, I'm just going to put these away for a sec. Obviously, the first region that comes to mind is Europe. A lot of our most famous wines are coming from Italy, they're coming from France, they're coming from Spain, and there's a reason for that. That's where the varietal of grape that makes wine is from. I mean, that's where it all started. And I actually brought, there we go, my atlas to show you something kind of fun. So this is an atlas of all the wine regions. This is Europe. This is the information that has all the European wine regions. It's more than half the book. It's like 2/3 of the book is all Europe. Mostly because a lot of the big wine growing countries like Spain, France, Italy, they have very particular demarcations within the country and different rules regarding how you can make wine, what grapes you can make wine. they've pretty much got it set, and they've had it set for hundreds upon hundreds of years. That being said, Europe does have its drawbacks when it comes to winemaking. And one of them is the fact that since they have been doing it so long, they tend to be traditionalists. They have a very set way of doing things, and they're generally not very interested in changing it. So while they make amazing wines, very, very subtle, flavorful wines, they tend to be the same across, I mean, within variations of year, is more or less the same wines, which obviously is a good thing. But that's where you get to the new world of wines. So Europe is referred to as old world. So when someone mentions an old world wine, that's when we're talking about Italy, France, Spain, basically the Mediterranean and Europe. So that's old world. New world, we have us. We've got here in Canada, like Ontario, BC. We've got America. So we've got obviously California. We've got Oregon. We've got Washington, and to a lesser extent, even Virginia and New York. You'd be surprised. They've got some decent wines coming out of the Northeast coast. But it's also South America. It's Australia. It's South Africa. And these regions are very new compared to Europe, but they make some fantastic, interesting wines. And a lot of them are, like, for example, in Canada, we have brought vines from Europe, but growing them in our soil with our conditions, our weather, makes something completely different. And that's the same for basically every New World region. So you get these old world wine styles like Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Malbec. These are all wines that originated in Europe, but the New World took these vines, transplanted them, sometimes even crossbred them with native species of grapes, and made something completely new. Obviously, I won't go over all of them, but Ontario in particular and Quebec are quite famous for making these crossbreed or what we call hybrid grapes. The vineyard I worked at last summer, Domaine Perrot in Navan, they had almost completely hybrid grapes on their vineyard, and it made some beautiful wines. So that's what I find the great thing about the New World is that they make very interesting wines. So when you're looking at what kind of wine that you want to drink, either with a meal or on its own, that's one of the questions you can sort of ask yourself is, do you want something that is sort of traditional? The old world wines tend to be a little more complex, a little more subtle, just because they've refined their techniques over the years. Or do you want something that's a little different, a little more interesting? New World wines tend to be a little bolder, especially places like California and Australia. They make bold, flavorful wines that just almost kick you in the face with their deliciousness. So it's really, I wouldn't say it's important, but it's a good thing to know when you're looking at buying a wine, what sort of styles you want. And if you like, and the questions are a bit later, I can go over some of the sort of popular wines from some various New World regions, wines that you may not have heard of that I would love to share with you guys. I don't have any of them on my little list right now. I've got some fun wines, but none of the really famous New World ones. So yes, so that is a brief overview of sort of wine regions. And if you want to learn more about the particular regions, I highly recommend that you go look up wine maps of either the New World countries, France, Spain, Italy, or Australia. Fantastic, fantastic wines. And a lot of regions have their own specialties. So I will open the floor to questions if you have any wine region related questions.
Thank you so much, Leah. So there is one in the chat wondering, do wines come out of Georgia?
They do. It's certainly not one. Oh, Georgia. Wait, Georgia the country or Georgia the state?
Let's go with both.
Okay. So it's Georgia the state, as far as I know, doesn't really do wines. I believe it's just a little too warm and humid because grapes do need a very specific set of sort of climate standards, I guess, to grow properly. And I don't believe Georgia, I mean, I'm sure there are people making wine in Georgia. It's just not a wine region. Georgia, the country, as in sort of the Eastern Europe side of things, they actually do make wine. But the thing is that Eastern European wines especially, we don't see a lot of. And there's a reason for that, because most of the wines that they make in Eastern Europe stays in Eastern Europe. It either stays within their own countries, or it goes to Russia, or it goes to Asia. So you can definitely find them. You might have to call around to a couple LCBOs to find some, for example, Georgian or Bosnian or Croatian wines. They are definitely out there. They're fun. They're not a traditional wine region, but they definitely do make wine.
Great, thank you so much. And there's the same sort of question about Mexico.
Again, not a traditional wine region, but they do make wines. We didn't learn a whole lot about them in our program. But because as far as personal experience that I know, Mexico tends to make more distilled spirits than they do wines. So they're definitely around, but they're definitely more known for, say, tequila or mezcal than they would be for wine or beer. Good beer's coming out of Mexico as well.
Great, thank you. What grapes make Canadian wines? Like, do you recommend purchasing a Canadian wine made of a certain type of grape?
That really depends on where in Canada. In BC, you will get a lot of the same wines as you do in California. So you will get your Cabernet Sauvignons, you will get your Sauvignon Blancs, your Merlots. I know a bit less about the BC ones, a little more of the Ontario ones. Ontario makes some fantastic Riesling, which is why I chose one of them for our tasting. Riesling is a really versatile, really hardy grape. So you will see a lot of Ontario Rieslings. We do make really nice Chardonnays as well, because Chardonnay is one of those grapes that it can do well in both cool and warm climates, and you get very different flavor profiles for both. Let's see, Pinot Noir is another good one that Ontario does. And I think I saw in the chat someone briefly talked about Baco Noir, which that is actually a cross. That's a hybrid grape that is not exclusive to Canada, but it's definitely a North American wine style, and it is so good. It's very earthy, I'd call it a masculine wine, very manly wine. Now, Nova Scotia is also starting up in their wine business. They're not what I would consider a traditional region yet, but they're getting there. They're making some really nice sparkling wines out there. So yeah, there's I would recommend looking up some of the local vineyards. Surprisingly, Ottawa has quite a few, like the Ottawa Valley has quite a few vineyards, and they make some fantastic wines. Or just going into the LCBO and going into the vintages section, and it'll have all sorts of Canadian wines. Definitely recommended.
Great, thank you so much. There's someone wondering if you've heard of coconut wine, and if so, have you tried it?
I haven't. That is, wow, coconut wine. Well, as long as it has sugar in it, sugar, water, oxygen, yeast, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to make a wine out of it. But I've never even heard of that, but I think I'm gonna have to now.
Perfect. And one question from earlier is wondering, can you mix wine into cocktails?
Oh, hell yeah. Heck yes. You definitely can, and I do. I actually did a little series months ago when I was in the middle of my bartending program, where I encouraged my friends. I said, okay, what cocktails do you like? I will recommend a wine to go in them. So there's some fantastic combinations you can make. And wine is one of those things that with cocktails, you can really play with it. Once you know the flavor profile of your wine, you can do so many beautiful things with it. And beyond just a spritzer, which, don't get me wrong, spritzers are great, but you can do a lot more fun things with wine than just spritzers or, you know, a mimosa with your sparkling wine.
Thank you so much. There's someone wondering, you mentioned the wineries around Ottawa. Do you recommend some of them? Do you know the names of them?
I do. In the West End, there's Kin Vineyards, who the winemaker there actually teaches at Algonquin, Brian Hamilton. So definitely hit him up if you want some information. I haven't visited it yet, but I have tasted their wines, and they're really quite good. And of course, I have to give a shout out to the vineyard I worked at last summer, Domaine Perrault. They make a beautiful range of wines, some of them that are made from the grapes on their vineyard, which are all hybrid grapes. And they also bring some grapes in from Niagara, so they can get a bigger variety of grapes, and they make the wine on site. So they have a great little tasting patio. They're open most of the year, definitely. And there's also near Domaine Perrault, if I can remember the name of it. I remember the name of the winemaker. His name's Jan Etter. And I can't remember the name of the vineyard, but it's right near Domaine Perrault. So definitely, you can find pamphlets and information about Ottawa wine tours. If you look online, they're definitely there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's it for the questions for now. If you want to move on to the next session, and we'll come back to more questions later on.
Perfect. Okay. Let's open some wine. I'm so excited. Okay. So first of all, we are going to start off with our sparkling. And there's a reason for that. You'd think that, oh, cap off the night with the bubbly. No. Traditionally, you want to start off your meal, start off your appetizers with your sparkling wine, because they go best with salty tidbits. They're great. It's great to drink on its own. But if you want to serve a nice appetizer, or even with, you know what's good with sparkling wine? Chips. Just a little snack, little snacky snack. Definitely reach for the bubbly. Now, the reason I didn't open this up is I do want to do almost like a little lesson on how to open a sparkling wine, because there are right ways and wrong ways to do it. I can't remember the exact numbers, but this cork comes out at a ridiculous speed and can really hurt someone. So when you're opening a bottle of sparkling wine, the first thing you want to do is take the cage off. But as soon as that cage is off, you want to be keeping your thumb or your finger on that cork, because you want to know where it's going, if it's going anywhere. And never, ever, 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 ever point it at anyone. In the Sommelier program, you could actually get in really big trouble if you opened, or if you're pointing a bottle of wine. I don't know where usually I have a napkin. But, so once you have the cage off, here's a towel. Normally I'd have a nice little napkin for this, but you want to twist very gently. Woo, woo. Now, that was a little fast. I got excited, I'm sorry. But what you want to do is you want to twist it and almost push it down at the same time so it doesn't come off too fast. When I was learning how to do this, they actually said you don't want it to pop, you want it to sigh. So when you're opening your bottle of sparkly, you don't want to do that big pop like they do in the movies. You want it just a little whisper of an open. The other way to open it, which I don't recommend, is called sabering, which you might have seen. That's when someone takes a big old knife or a sword and just cuts the end off. I do it at New Year's, but you shouldn't do it. It's dangerous. So we're just going to, for those of you who are pouring, you can get yourself a little bit of our bubbly here. And just a quick little interesting fact about sparkling wine is you can always tell, not always, but you can more or less tell what method was used to make the sparkling wine by how fine the carbonation is, the bubbles. Because there are 3 ways to make sparkling wine. One, which is the traditional method that's used in Cava from Spain, also Champagne from France, is it's fermented in the bottle. So all the fermentation happens within the bottle. All that carbon dioxide that's released by the fermentation stays in the bottle, and that's what makes it bubbly. There's also doing it in a tank. So it's the same as the traditional method, but on a bigger scale. So you ferment it in the tank. Or there's just carbonating it, like you do soda or beer. When you have the traditional method, I know it's hard to see, but if you have your own glass, these bubbles are very fine that are rising from the bottom of the glass. That usually means it's done with either the tank or the bottle fermentation, and it's a higher quality champagne. If you see big bubbles, it's basically was carbonated like a beer or soda. So what can you expect from a traditional champagne, or not champagne, sparkling wine like champagne or cava? Usually you can expect some fruitiness, some breadiness, because from that fermentation in the bottle, the yeast gives it a very bready, kind of yeasty flavor. So, santé, give it a little taste. So when you're tasting wine, the first thing is to smell it. That's what they call the bouquet. So that sort of symphony of smells that you kind of get into your nose, that's kind of like the appetizer of the wine. And the next thing, when you sip it, swirl it around on your tongue as much as you can. Get it all over your mouth, all over your tongue, your cheeks, the front of your teeth. You just want that flavor everywhere. And then you can swallow it. So for those of you who are following along, I think there's definitely some breadiness, some yeastiness, maybe some yellow apple. I love this wine. So this is the Segura Viudas. This is called, like I said, it's a cava, which is a traditionally made wine from Spain. I know I could have done champagne, but I wanted to show you something better. Because as great as champagne is, it's also very expensive. Cava is an equally gorgeous, equally delicious wine. It's made with the same method as champagne, just different grapes in a different country. And also, you're only paying, what, 15 bucks a bottle? You don't need to spend $100 on champagne. I like to say that if you want to show off, or if you're really celebrating something, splurge on that champagne. But if you just want a really nice, traditional, sparkling, bubbly wine to enjoy, reach for the cava. So hopefully you had a bit of a chance to try that cava. I do recommend it. It's at the LCBO. So nice. Next up, we have our Anciano. Now this is a Tempranillo grape, or Tempranillo wine made from a Tempranillo grape. It's a very traditional Spanish wine. You will also find Tempranillo grapes in Rioja, which you may have heard of. It's another popular Spanish wine. And I like this one because it is a nice, bold, flavorful red wine, again, at a really, really reasonable price. So you're not paying top bucks. If you want to give it a quick sniff, even in the bottle, a little bit of chocolate. And you may hear me talking about a whole lot of different flavors. This is called a flavor wheel. The Sommelier program will get it in their kit. You can also find them online. And this is basically just all the different scents and tastes of things that you will typically find in a wine. Even a little section for what you'll smell or taste if it's a faulted or failure wine. So this is a great resource to get accustomed to the different kinds of tastes that you will find in wine. Generally, you'll find fruits, you'll find herbs like green herbs or straw. You'll find earthiness, so like damp earth or damp wood, vegetable. If anyone's ever had a Sauvignon Blanc, there's usually a lot of green peppery flavor in it. Berries. There's a whole set of things that you can sort of see with your mouth, I guess. So let's give this a quick sniff. Since this is a red wine, this was aged in oak. So once the wine was fermented, it was put in oak barrels, and that adds a lot of flavor to reds. Whites typically aren't oaked. So there is a lot of that oaky smell in it. I'm also getting some dark, maybe dried fruits, like maybe prunes or plums. Maybe even a little bit of licorice. The nice thing about, I have a question mark after all of those things because wine is very subjective. So I may say, oh, it smells like plums. But someone else will say, well, I think it's more like raspberries. If you were a sommelier, if you were being quizzed or tested on this, you'd probably not get that wrong. Now, if you sniff this and say, I smell pears or oranges, they'd be like, no, that's a little far off. So same thing, coat your mouth, let it sit on your tongue, and we need another sip of that. So yeah, very woody, but a lot of juicy red fruits. I would say like plums, berries, and also some spices, which is something, again, an oaked red wine will have. You'll get things like nutmeg, cinnamon, cedar, very characteristic of a red wine that has been age oaked. There are some red wines that you won't see that have been aged in oak. It's less common. So something like a Beaujolais from France generally is a red wine that has not seen an oak barrel, but the vast majority will. And you will also see things like bourbon barrel aged. And that's sort of a joke in the community, is that bourbon barrels hide a lot of sins. So you will see wines that maybe aren't as great, but they throw it in a barrel that used to hold bourbon, and it adds sort of that bourbony flavor to it, and it kind of hides maybe those parts of the wine that aren't as nice. So hopefully you enjoy that. This is another really affordable, beautiful wine. I would say with a bold red wine like this, you want to pair that with things like a steak or something with a lot of those complementary spices in it. Maybe something with a nutmeg or cinnamon. I would even pair this with a not too sweet dessert. That's kind of unorthodox, but you want something that will not be overwhelmed by those beautiful, woody, spicy flavors. I love that wine. It's so nice. Okay, moving on to the last one. I love this wine. Now we're doing this last because it is a dessert wine. And dessert wines, typically you would want to pair with desserts. That's why they're a dessert wine. The traditional way of doing it is you don't want your wine to be, no, wait, hang on. What's the rule? You don't want the wine to be too much sweeter than the dish. That's what it is. So you want it to be sort of on par. So what I'm doing, sorry, I just realized that I didn't show you how to open this. So when you're opening a regular corked bottle, I opened the red one early because I wanted it to breathe a bit, but you want to take your little waiter's tool here, and you want the little knife, and you're going to run it along underneath the lip of the wine, and then use it to lift off that cap. So that's the first step. Most wines will have a little tab that you can pull, and if you want to do that, you can do that too, but not all wines do. This one doesn't. And then once you've got the cap off, you take your corkscrew, and you want that point to go right in the middle of the cork and twist it in. Wherever that center point goes, that's where the rest of the cork will go. And you twist it until you get about 1 to 1.5 sort of spirals from the top. Use that ledge and pull. And it'll only take you about halfway, but that's why you have a second ledge. Do the same. And here's a little pro tip. You never want to, like the champagne, you don't want to pull it, you don't want to get that pop sound. Once it's almost out, just give it a little bit of a wiggle. And there you go. All right, dessert wines. Great for desserts. And that's really, I mean, they're nice to drink on their own, but really they're at their best when paired with desserts. Oops, that's my sparkling. There we go. Okay. So this is what would be considered a lusciously sweet wine, similar to an ice wine, but not quite as sweet. So like a typical Riesling, you will get almost a plasticky smell off of it. Some people describe it as like the smell that comes off a toy doll's head. This will call it like a doll's head plastic. And maybe a little bit of orange or lemon or citrus. So for those of you who are tasting with us, you can tell right off the bat, it just hits your mouth. It's sweet. It also has a little bit of a bite to it, that little bit of an acidic tang, and that's what helps balance out the sweetness. So this is something that I would have probably with, say, a lemon meringue pie to complement the lovely lemony flavors that are in there. Or maybe a fruit tart, since there are some fruity flavors in there, like citrus, maybe some lychee or some pear. These are the wines that you want to drink a little bit of. You're not going to be downing a whole bottle in one sitting because it is very sweet. Yeah, so those are our wines. I hope you enjoyed them. I certainly did. I don't know how I'm going to drink all these bottles in the next couple of days because I have to work tomorrow. But I'm certainly going to try my best to not let them go to waste because I do love them so much. Now, I am going to go over some food pairing sort of guidelines, but before I does anyone have any questions about the wines we just tasted or about wine tasting in general? So go ahead. Ask questions if you want to.
So there is one in the chat from earlier, and one student's wondering why you chose that selection of wine that you chose and why you didn't pick a full Canadian choosing. Well,
first of all, I wanted to give you guys a taste of different wine regions. So I have 2 Old World wines and 1 New World wine. So that was the first one. I wanted to get a red, a white, and a sparkling. And a dessert. I just wanted to get the biggest range of wines that I could within 3 bottles. And that's the other reason why I didn't do a full Canadian one, because I definitely have a Canadian one, and that was important. That sort of represents our New World wines. But I did want to give a nice variety of different types of wine that maybe you wouldn't normally sort of reach for. You know, I didn't want to Not that there's anything wrong with, say, a Pinot Grigio or a Merlot or a Cabernet Sauvignon, but I wanted to give you guys something a little more interesting. Also, all three of these are amongst my favorites. So I also chose them so that I could share my favorites with you.
Love that. Thank you so much. The next question, and I'm probably going to brutalize a lot of these wine pronunciations. How do Proseccos, Cremant, or Spumante compare to Cava or Champagne?
Those are all different, more or less the same wines from different regions. So a Cremant is a sparkling wine from France, but from not Champagne. So you'll get a Cremant, like a Burgundy Cremant, or I've suddenly forgotten all the different wine regions in France. But basically, it just means it's a sparkling wine from not Champagne. And Prosecco is a sparkling wine from Italy. And what was the other one? Cremant, Prosecco.
Spumante?
Spumante, same deal, except Spumante just means it's a little, I think it means it's a little less sparkling. Because there's Frizzante, there's Spumante. It's just different levels of carbonation, basically, in the wines. And Cava is basically, it's Champagne, but from Spain. So a lot of these terms mean essentially the same thing, but from different regions or different countries. It's different names for them.
When you say the names, it sounds a lot better than when I say them. So thank you for that.
I also speak French. So all those French terms, I'm like, yeah, I got this.
The next question is related to when you're smelling and tasting the wine. How do they get those flavors in there? Is it something they add to the wine to specifically get those flavors? Or is it something you're picking up on because it just reminds you of something that you've had in the past?
That's a fantastic question. Actually, those all come from the grape itself. So the different flavors within the grapes, and also the climate, so the weather, and also the soil. So what happens is that these aren't the flavors of blueberries or pears or cedar or whatever. They're called phenols. They're aromatic compounds that smell or taste like these different things. And that's why it's so subjective, because the phenol that I think smells like lavender. No, not lavender. You don't really put lavender in in wines. Let's say basil, which you will find in some big red wines. Someone else might say, well, I think it's more like mint. It's like chemical compounds that are reminiscent of these real world other flavors. And those are all based on the type of grape and how it ripens and in what soil it ripens and how much sunlight it gets. It's really quite fascinating. So yeah, it's sort of both. There's no flavors added unless you count the ones that come from wood. So from the oak barrels. It's all just all these different factors that are acting on the grape to bring out these different chemical compounds that remind us of various flavors.
Thank you so much. There's a student wondering, what is a good affordable sherry?
Ooh, sherry. I believe it's called Osborne. I don't drink a lot of sherries, but I do have, actually, I might even have one in my little cabinet here, and I quite liked it. Yeah, Osborne. So this was a fairly affordable sherry that I used for quite a lot of different recipes. And it's very nice. It's like a port in that it will keep for quite a while. It's great to add to desserts. I used it to drink with a dessert because even though it's not necessarily sweet, I can't remember if this one is sweet or not. I don't think so, but it has that. Some wines, even though they have a sweetness that's not based on the sugar, but based on just the flavor profile. It kind of pseudo sweet, I guess you could say. So that's the one I use. That's the one I like. Hopefully that's something you'd like to.
Students are wondering, is there a correlation to a twist cap versus a cork? Does it scream quality or preference of the maker?
It's preference of the maker as well as economics. There are some purists who will say that a twist cap is inferior, but as far as I know, there have been studies that show that it's no better or worse. Just using a cork is more traditional. You know, you'll find it on older old world wines, especially just because, like I said earlier, they're traditionalists. They've been doing things the same way for hundreds of years, and they don't really feel like changing. I drink wines that are both cork and screw cap, and I have not seen any real difference as far as aging or ageability. I think that if anything, you're more likely to find a screw cap in a younger wine that is meant to be drunk quite quickly or in the next year or so, as opposed to a corked wine, which is, you know, if you want to be keeping a wine, aging it, storing it, you'll want it to be in a cork. That's sort of the only thing that that's anecdotally I have found. But that's, as far as the science goes, I don't think there's any real difference.
Great, thank you so much. There's one more question I want to ask before we get back to the presentation. I do also want to highlight that it's 6:52, so we're going to go over tonight in time. If students have another session to get to or somewhere they have to be, I want to reassure you that the session's being recorded and it'll be posted on the algonquincollege.com/orientation webpage before the end of the week. So if you have to jump off and miss the rest of the session, you can catch it there later on in the week, so you won't miss the important information. So that last question I'm going to get to before we go back to the presentation, there's two that are very similar. They're wondering, how long can wine be kept fresh once it's open, and how would you reseal it for that time period that it's still fresh?
Normally a wine will last, if you just open it up and like just pop the cork back in there or retwist it, you're looking at anywhere from 2 to 4 days. There are some devices that exist where they're like a vacuum pump, where you put this little thing on sort of the top of the bottle and you kind of pump the air out of it. And I think I've never used one personally, but apparently that's supposed to make it last a bit longer because you're bringing the oxygen out of it, and oxygen is what can make a wine go bad. But yeah, you're looking at an average of about 3, maybe 4. You're pushing it at 5, but about that for a wine bottle that's already been opened. And there was another part of the question?
No, it was just how do you reseal it? So you mentioned that with putting the cork back in, or
you can either, let's use this one. You can either just take the cork that you just used and just sort of jam it back in the top, because as long as it's sealed, that's what you're looking for. There's also, I don't think I have any with me. Oh, I do. There's also little devices you can get like this that they kind of pop onto the top, and it's a rubber stopper that kind of opens up and seals it off. I got these for like $1 at a wine place. So, I mean, I have definitely been known to just put saran wrap over it if I was in a pinch. So really all you want to do is make sure that there's not oxygen getting in. So whichever way you want to use, I think once I even used tin foil because I couldn't find any of my corks. But yeah, you just want the air to not get in. Okay, was that the last question for that?
You got it. So we'll head back to the presentation, and any questions that are still in the chat, we will answer in the next question break.
We've only got one section left, which is the wine and food pairing, sort of a little more details. I'll try not to talk too much, and so we won't go too far over the time limit. So when it comes to food and wine pairing, the rule is there are no rules. No, that's a lie. I mean, the thing is that these are meant to be guidelines. Really, personal taste trumps all. So while there are certain wines that are recommended for certain types of dishes or certain types of menus, if you don't like that wine, don't drink it with that meal. You drink what you want to drink. So the guidelines that we are taught generally are just wines that usually taste good with certain dishes. So a heavier kind of red, rich wine like this, like the one we tasted, the Tempranillo, generally you're going to want to have with meat, with red meat, with rich, with fatty, with dark roasted vegetables, things that are roasted, because in a red wine, you might have heard this thing called tannins. So tannins are what sort of get that drying sensation in your mouth when you take a sip of red wine. There are certain wines that have a lot of it, red wines that have not as much of it. I don't think this one had, I almost drank out of the bottle. No, this one doesn't have, it's not super heavy on the tannins. You take a sip, you switch it around, and you will get a brief sort of like, all the moisture is gone out of your cheeks. That's from the tannins. So when you're eating something that is rich, like a heavy, like a fatty meat, that will, the oils in it sort of are smooth out the tannins of a red wine and make it, you know, more pleasant. So you're looking at wines like Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, a Rioja, those big reds you want to have with a nice, like a barbecue. Oh, barbecue with red wine, primo. When you have something that's a little lighter, like a pasta, like with a tomato sauce, you'll want a lighter red. So something like a Merlot or a Chianti. You know, these are light reds, usually not super heavy on tannins, but they still have that oomph of a red wine that can balance out the oomph of a nice herbed pasta sauce. Yes. You want to use your light, crisp wines like your Pinot Grigios or your Sauvignon Blancs, those white wines that have a little acidic tang to them, with creamier sauces like Alfredo sauces or fresh vegetables, or seafood, things that are sort of lighter on the palate. You want a lighter wine. A lot of wine pairing is looking at the strength of a wine. So how powerful is it and how powerful is your dish? Because you don't want one overpowering the other. Another common guideline is when you have something that's really buttery, something like a classic pairing, lobster with garlic butter. You want an oaked Chardonnay. So Chardonnay is a white wine, but one of the few white wines that does really well when it's aged in oak. So you end up with a white wine, but that's sort of creamy and spicy. That goes great with really rich butter sauces, like lobster with butter sauce. That's one of those little, like, if you're having lobster, you might want some Chardonnay. But again, if you don't like Chardonnay, don't drink it. Another common one is something like an off-dry or even a medium sweet wine. This one's, I think, a little sweet for this, but it's not the sweetest. So something like a Gewürztraminer, which is a German white wine that often has a bit of sweetness to it, or a Riesling with a bit of sweetness to it, is great with spicy foods. So with spice, you want a little bit of sweetness to take the edge off the spice. So that's a really common, guideline. Spicy foods, so like a curry, you put it with a nice, just a little bit of sweetness to it. It just kind of mellows it out. Really, really beautiful. Like I said before, you want your dessert wines with dessert. But another good thing to put with a dessert is a fortified wine. So your sherries, your Madeiras, your ports. Actually, one of my all-time favorite wines is actually Hungarian, and it's a very sweet dessert wine that I love to pair with ice cream or fruit. Oh, it's beautiful. It's called Tokai, and I love it. And again, like I said earlier, you want your appetizers, your little salty snacks with the sparkling wines. So those are sort of the guidelines. You want rich meats with a red. You want sort of the lighter tomato-y type ones with what did I say? Meat with big reds. Sorry, meat with big reds. Tomato type lighter dishes with a little bit of heaviness to them. With the lighter reds, you want your fresh veggies, seafood with whites sweet wines with, or sweeter wines with spicy dishes, desserts with a sweet wine, and sparkling wine with salty, small salty apps. So those are sort of the guidelines. But like I said, you drink what you like. So if, let's say you're at a fancy restaurant and you order a meal and the sommelier comes and says, oh, well, I recommend this Merlot with your pasta puttanesca. And you say, I don't really like Merlot. It's his job to say, okay, well, let me think of a wine that you will like that would also go with this dish. So don't be afraid to say, I don't like that wine. I have my personal tastes. You probably have your personal tastes. Go out and find them. Yeah, so that's wine pairing with food. Any questions?
That was great, Leah. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I was following along and putting some tips in the chat as you were going. I'm going to go back up and grab some of those questions from earlier. So there's a student wondering if you have recommendations for people who want to get into wine but don't necessarily like wine. Mm-hmm. They really want to like it. They've heard that girls' night out is a good place to start, but they don't really like that either.
Yeah, I would say if you're just starting off with wine, start with something that's a little on the sweeter side, but don't, I'm going to sound like a bit of a snob here. Don't go for those things like girls' night out or bodacious or what are the other ones? Apothic. They're not bad wines, but if you really want to get a good appreciation for more traditional wines, that's not the place to start. I would say probably sparkling is a good place to start because it's light. Some of them are a little bit sweet. You just want something easy. I would probably recommend, oh God, there's so many wines. Actually, you know what? I would recommend you go into an LCBO and say, I just want something light and simple. Pinot Grigio is a good place to start. That's not my favorite, but it's a good place to start. Merlot for reds is a very easy drinking red, or a Chianti. Yeah, start with the lighter wines. That's what I would say, because I find that even in my personal preference, I tend not to drink big, bold, heavy reds unless I'm drinking it with something in particular. Because just for plain enjoyment, I like the lighter ones. They're easy to drink, they're simple. But I would say if you're starting out, avoid the big, like Californian reds, the ones that have a lot of added sugar. Those tend to, like I said, they hide a lot of sins. Sugar also hides a lot of sins when it comes to wine. So avoid added sugar and avoid bourbon barrel stuff.
Great, thank you so much for that tip. There's a student wondering where Grappa sort of fits on the list.
Grappa is actually a spirit. It's a distilled, it's sort of like wine that's been distilled. So what Grappa is they take the skins from the grapes that have been used to make wine, and they put them in the wine, and then they soak them for a bunch of time, and then they distill it. So it's sort of like a cross between a wine and like a vodka sort of thing, or brandy. It's sort of like a brandy, but it's heavy. Not heavy as in, like it packs a punch. But yes, it's a distilled wine spirit thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Next question is, can you recommend a good ice wine brand?
I'm not a huge fan of ice wine. Canada makes some nice ice wines. I just find them a little sweet for my taste. Inniskillen's a good place to start. If you want to get something really special, though, I do recommend finding a German ice wine, because that's actually where it started. They're actually called ice wine, literally ice wine. And they're beautiful. They're often made from Riesling, the same as Canada and Germany have a lot of similar climates, so you will find a lot of crossover. But a nice Riesling or a Gewürztraminer ice wine, that's a good place to start. But Inniskillen is good. You can definitely get them there. But really what I would recommend is go to a local place. You know, go to one of the local vineyards and pick up some ice wine if you really want to get a taste for the region.
Thank you so much. There's a student wondering what makes some wines more complex than others.
That there is a lot of factors. So a big one is climate, but also it depends on how big of a batch of wine you're making at once. So if you're going for a really big winery, like something in California or something in Australia that just make these, they literally have giant vats of wine. They're not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at the complexities of that particular year or that particular harvest, which is something that a smaller vineyard would do, but that's also why they're more expensive. So generally speaking, the terroir, so the climate, the soil, also how much attention is paid to the steps in winemaking. Most winemakers will blend to a certain degree. There are rules, especially in Europe, as to how much, like let's say you have a Merlot. Well, by certain rules, you can call it a Merlot even if it has like 5% Cabernet Sauvignon in it or 5% of something else in it. So the more complex wines will have that 3% of this, 5% of that. It'll still be the bulk, will be that one grape, but they will add little bits of other wines to it. Or you'll have the different kinds of oak barrels. There's American oak, there's English oak, there's Hungarian oak, there's different oak barrels that you can put your wine in that add those little layers of flavor as well. So it's dealer's choice. So it depends on how the winery works and how much detail or how much attention is paid to the detail of how the wine is made.
Great, Leah, thank you. The next question, a student's wondering if you can recommend a red wine for people that get headaches from tannins.
Ooh, okay, yes. I would recommend an unoaked red for sure. So something like a Beaujolais or a Chianti. Chiantis can be oaked, but usually if they are, they're not oaked for a long time because while there are some tannins in the skin of the grape that will automatically end up in a red wine, the oak in the barrel also adds tannins. So if you want to avoid tannins, look for a wine that, and you want a red wine, definitely look for one that is not barrel aged. Beaujolais and Chianti are some good examples.
Great, thank you so much. A student's wondering about pairing rice wine.
Oh, like sake? I actually did a course in sake, and I would say that sake is in the same kind of grouping as I would put with a crisp white wine. So you'll want to pair it with seafood or fresh vegetables, honestly, like sushi. And there's a reason why you drink sake with sushi, because it's that perfect pairing. You've got your the rice, which is just with a little bit of vinegar and sugar, and you've got your fresh veggies, you've got your seafood, and that just, I mean, there's a reason why they're served together. So I would say, yeah, seafood, fresh veggies, things that have maybe even a little bit of an acidic sauce to it, like lemon sauce or anything with vinegar, that kind of thing.
Thank you so much. And the last question we have today is about a rosé wine. Are you able to recommend a nice rosé and maybe something to pair with it?
Sure. I used a rosé for one of my pairing projects that was beautiful, and it's the Cote Rose, which is it's pretty popular at the LCBO. It's in a bottle that has sort of on the bottom of it, it's shaped like a rose, and it may seem a little kitschy, but it's actually a beautiful rosé, and I like it because it's not too sweet. I don't think it's sweet at all, actually. A lot of rosés will have sugar added just because that's sort of what the market wants. A lot of North American rosés will be sweetened. Usually a French rosé isn't, and that's what I sort of prefer. And for that, a rosé, depending on if it's sweetened or not, you can use it for desserts, like light desserts, like fruit or a fruit tart. But if you're just having it with a meal, I would say, it basically falls in between what you would serve with a white wine with and what you would serve an unoaked red with. So lighter things, like I would be able to serve that with a lighter pasta, tomato sauce, like not the big heavy meaty ones, but more the lighter ones. Or you could do that with chicken. Rosé would be great with sort of a herbed chicken of some kind, maybe some roasted potatoes, just for a bit of, bit of bulk. But yeah, I mean, generally heavier wines, heavier dishes, lighter wines, lighter dishes. So rosé kind of can swing a little bit both ways.
Thank you so much. And I lied. I'm going to take one last question because I think this is a good one and a quick one. For stir fry, what wine would you pair with it?
That's a good one. I think it depends on the stir fry. If you're thinking of like your sort of traditional sort of teriyaki, I would say probably an off-dry white. So something like a Riesling or a Gewürztraminer, or even a rosé would probably go well with that. If you're looking at something that's maybe heavier on the ginger, I would say probably a Chardonnay. What you're doing is you want to match the spices with what's in the wine. So when it comes to pairing wine with food, the best thing to do is to both know the dish, so the different spices, the different ingredients, also know the wine, so you know what flavors are in the wine. So it's tricky to sort of just say, oh, I think this would be good with this, because it's definitely a very broad recommendation. So, like when I say, a curry would go well with a, slightly sweetened wine. Well, yes, but not all of those wines would go well with all curries. So you really have to know, that's why the tasting comes into play. You want to taste the wine, see what flavors are in there, and then sort of match them to what the dish is. But yeah, I think, sake would probably go quite well with it. But yeah, an off-dry or a crisp white, unless it was a really heavy sauce, in which case I wouldn't go as far as a big red for that, maybe a lighter red.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today, and for staying late to ensure that we were able to answer all the important questions from our students.
Not a problem. If I could leave you with anything as far as wine goes, it would be drink what you like, how you like it. Price does not always equal quality. And don't be a snob with wine. Wine knowledge, like knowing a bit about wine, can help heighten the enjoyment of either an event or a meal. But unless you're actually sitting in a room full of sommeliers, you drink because it's enjoyable. And I think keeping that in mind is really important.
Great. Thank you for those last words, Leah. And then on behalf of Algonquin College, we want to give all of our AC students a huge thank you for participating in virtual AC Day 1. If you're interested in rewatching the recording from this event, the recordings will be added to the algonquincollege.com/orientation website before the end of the week. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Enjoy your wine.